Hey YouTube. Patreon patron Renee asked for a video on SynthScaper, and I am happy to oblige, because this is another amazing app from Igor Vasiliev, who always makes interesting experimental apps. And he won me over with his previous app, SynthScaper, which was this great, gritty, experimental app. This, however, is still quite experimental and weird, but it's designed to be a traditional synth. So we've got the weird engine built into a more traditional synth engine. So I'm going to try to show you as much of this as I can. I honestly couldn't even begin to scratch the surface of all of the depth of this. But let's get into it. We have all of these wonderful parameters, and it's going to be a little bit easier if I load in a kind of a preset of a preset. Like there's scenes, and there's oscillators, and there's presets. There's all kinds of different layers to this. I'm going to just throw in a few of my favorite sounds here. This infernal pressure is quite amusing. So I set that now, and that is my first oscillator. And you see we got these spatial stuff. We move it around, and we can tweak the space and reflections. To keep this video a little less weird, I'm just going to leave everything dead center here so that we're not doing weird panning stuff while I'm trying to explain things. So we've loaded in this infernal pressure, and now when I bring up the oscillator parameter page, we can now tweak this on each of its layers. It's got 3. And you see it's got different tunings for each of these. And there's this great animation thing over here on the right that's telling you a lot of interesting things. So the top outer rim is the filter for each individual layer. And this inner thing is the volume of each layer. But to kind of make this a little bit more manageable, you can make sweeping changes to everything. So let's say I want to make all of the layers sound the same. I go into the envelope parameters for level and use this knob, and you see as I move this now, oops, I'm on layer 3. Okay, I go to layer all, I do the same thing here. I bring this down to 50%. And now all 3 layers have 50%. And the same is true for anything else that you change on when you're at layer all. So that's really important to keep in mind. So you notice how layer 1 or layer 2 is tuned up an octave and layer 3 is tuned down an octave. If you go into layer all and try to switch the octave, you're going to set all of them to whatever that new octave is. So if you want to change the octave on everything down, bring up the keyboard and use this to transpose. So now everything is still detuned the way it was originally, but now we've got it tuned down an octave. And there was a time where I was amazed whenever a synth app gave us 3 whole envelopes to screw around with. This is just layers more. I haven't even done a full head count of how many envelopes you have in this. So each layer has these 6 envelopes for each of the 3 oscillators. So that's just 6 times 3 times 3. It's a lot of envelopes, a lot of LFOs, and you can just start assigning all kinds of different things to all over the place. So let me first show you some really cool things that they're doing in here with the level envelope here. You notice this is in logarithmic, which is kind of typical. Sometimes it'll be linear for your attack. But you can also do exponential. So you hear how that changes things. I'll give it a little bit more attack so you can listen to that. I'll bring up the levels a bit. So that's more traditional. Still sounds like a traditional sort of ramp up with the attack, but this exponential makes it bloom in an entirely new way. I love that you can do that. So you can actually set, okay, I want logarithmic attack, and it's already set for exponential release. So it gives you new ways of playing with how that sound is shaped. I really like having that kind of an option. So let me tune this back down. So we got a nice kind of menacing thing happening here. And you might notice in the center of the screen, we've got this weird dotty thing. And this is where fans of SynthScaper will have a little bit of a leg up on everybody else. This is actually changing the bits of this sample, you know, all the ones and zeros, to be either a 1 or a 0. So if I set this to set 0 now, the 5th and 8th or 9th bits in this sample are going to be swapped to a 0. So if they're a 1, they're now a 0, and that'll do weird crunchy things. And now you can really hear that when you put in a lot of these. Oh, I'm on layer 3 again. Damn it. All right. And set it to 0. All right, there, fine. You're hearing it. This is a complicated app. Give me a break here. So there's this fun slider here, so you can actually like scroll around and screw around and find textures you like. So we got kind of a hollow sound there. I'm gonna bring up that level just a little bit more while I'm doing this part. So that's fun, but we can do weird things to that. So in our address envelope in LFO, we can set an LFO to this and say assign. And now this is going to start wobbling that. Now we've got a cool electric sound in that. It sounds like we need to do some filtering. So let's bring up the filter page, which is right next to the oscillator button. We got a filter. And here you see the effects. They're labeled as the filter parameters, but there's all kinds of different effects you can assign to this. So let's swap out this flanger for a more typical low-pass filter. And let's give that an envelope. I'm not going to do anything too weird here. I don't want any attack. I want typical logarithmic decay. And we can change the filter's peak from here, or we can just back out into this and set it here. It'll now be set in here as well. So there's different ways of playing with that. And we can give a little bit of resonance. So that's taking that weird stuff that we started off with and bringing it down to a more logical synthesis. Let me set up a second example now. I'll mute that one and bring in the second oscillator. And for this one, I want to load up the pad Delicious Silk. Really nice, just beautiful on its own. I don't have to screw around too much with that, but I do want to screw around with it a little bit. So this left and right delay is a little unnecessary. Let's bring in a bandpass filter on this. Oops, I did not do that. Let me try that again. You got to remember to hit the set. All right. So I want to do something like this programmatically with an envelope. So let's actually make use of that exponential curve. That's a little too dramatic. I'm going to have to bring down that attack, but to hear how that's going to sound with the other one, let's bring in our first oscillator. Oh yeah, I forgot to take down the volume on that. Yeah, so we need to bring down the attack. Oops. The attack of the envelope. And this this gritty thing that I've got going on with the infernal pressure isn't sounding good polyphonically. So I can change that by bringing up the keyboard and limiting it to just one voice. If you find that you're only using a few oscillators, like one or two oscillators, you could turn it off, any that you're not using, and that'll save CPU. So for this, though, I'm just going to reduce it to monophonic. You can also do some interesting stuff here, like fixed octave and degrade. Oh dear. Okay, I didn't want a fixed octave. Okay, let me save this. Alright, that got me back in the ballpark. I'm trying to keep this moving because there's so many things I want to show you. So now when I try to play the second oscillator polyphonically, yeah, it's no longer trying to make a big mess of the gritty sound. It's just kind of giving us a stab of the gritty weirdness, and then it gets into the soaring pretty. But to really bring home that point, let's take a third oscillator and do some more pretty stuff. So for this, there's an instrument I really like. Strings, which I think is going to sound good with the silk because that's also kind of stringy. I'll actually mute these so you can hear that alone. And now with the delicious silk. So you hear how the attack on our second oscillator is quite short. It's coming in right after that stab, and it's pronounced because we use that exponential ramp. Whereas the strings is coming in later, like so. That's an interesting way of layering this up. I think it's just a little bit too slow to come in. So once again, I'm going into layer all, going into my level, and yeah, that attack is 2.8 seconds. That seems a bit long. That's a little too short. Yeah, so it's wow, I just got this like kind of vision of it's a swelling fountain where like you get the first part of it and then the big explosion. That's really working out. Let me play this a little bit. All right, I like that. Now let's hear how that sounds with our first oscillator in here doing its weird gritty thing. I honestly don't know how this is going to turn out. Let me turn off that degrade. I think that's screwing with things a little too much. Oh dear. All right, let's try to tame that a little bit. Give it just a little. Oh, it's already got a little bit of attack. Damn. Let's give it a little bit more. I'm on the right thing. What the hell? Oh yeah, okay. It's just really aggressive. Let's try a little bit more. Yeah. Okay, so right in that area, it's giving us that metallic sound that sounds really good as a counter texture to the strings. Turn off this LFO. I think that's just adding a little bit too much texture. Nope. There really is no way of like logically thinking, oh yeah, the 16th bit in my 32-bit segment definitely needs to be a 0. Like you have to screw around with it and try to find something that sounds good. And I really like throwing a LFO at this to kind of jiggle it. Like right now I'm jiggling it quite slowly at 2.2 seconds. You can set it to a short time scale for the LFO. So now it's changed that to 0.2 seconds. So let's hear that. That actually sounds better, I think. It's like super rapid now. There's a lot I haven't shown you, and I'm trying to think of anything that's really important. Like, I guess one of the most important things that's not very clear, like there's a whole manual in here, and it will teach you all kinds of great stuff. And what's really nice about this manual, developers take note, right? If you scroll down, let's say we're reading down and we get to the scenes part, and we close this, and we start doing whatever we learned about. If you hit that again, it takes you right back to the scenes part. That is so handy, because this is a huge manual. And I'll be honest, like, Igor is Russian, okay? And I don't know what intermediate language this arrived to in English, but it did not arrive intact. It's rough. So there's a lot of details in there, but it's not necessarily very obvious. One thing that is really confusing is the effects. You might have noticed that there's a lot of these parameters in here, right, on all of the envelopes and LFOs. We've got this effect 1 and effect 2. And what that's referencing is more like macros. So you can assign one of those to these. This is effect 1 and this is effect 2. And this top thing up here is the master volume. So you get really cool performance controls if you want to assign, like, bring in this thing and bring in that other thing and make it louder or whatever. Lots of great performance things that are available using the space and reflex and moving things around. So I hope that this has been engaging. I don't know if it's necessarily been informative. Thank you very much to Renee for suggesting this. If you'd like to suggest another video, become a Patreon, and then you can do that. Take it easy, folks.